Hi, good morning. I hope that everyone can hear me okay. So today is 8 a.m. It's Thursday the 29th, and every week at 8 a.m. UK time, we do these live webinars for our ZP Developer Zone members. So I always try and do a little sound check, make sure that everyone can hear me okay. But anyway, let's go on with the webinar. So we've got quite a few new members this week. So I appreciate you all joining us. Yeah, so I did just do a sound check, so it is coming through. Okay, so I'm going to go a bit quick today, and I'm sorry to go a bit quick, but lots of questions, lots of data has come in from the members, and a couple of things I'm going to talk about. I am going to talk about glucose sensors quite a bit. We had something like 3 or 4 questions from different people this week about glucose sensors. And I know we've talked a lot about glucose sensors, but it is, this Zimmer & Peacock is focused on electrochemical biosensors, and the big guy in electrochemical sensors is still glucose. But I'm also going to show you an EIS capability now in Djuli. So Djuli is that online cloud database for electrochemical data. It allows you to sort of upload the data, share the data, store and analyze the data. So we're also going to do a quick demo on Djuli. So every week we do this developer zone, and we have this webinar, and the membership has kind of really grown. So I definitely appreciate that. So this webinar is really driven by the forum. So in the forum, people post their questions every week, and so we've had a number of questions come in, and this is when we kind of respond to those questions. So last week, and it's also relevant this week, we talked about activating an electrode to make a glucose sensor from it. So we discussed, you take a electrode. This is a ZP screen printed electrode, and you can pipette on the enzyme solution, and you can pipette on the cross-linking solution. Now, something that we touched upon last week was you can also add a barrier layer. So there's also a barrier layer available. Now that barrier layer is going to be important to part of this discussion. So at ZP, you can sort of make a glucose sensor on one of our electrodes using, essentially a 3-step process where enzyme layer, cross-linking layer, and then when they are cured, an actual barrier layer. And we only really first mentioned the barrier layer last week. Now, what is the role of this barrier layer? So we also talked about this a bit last week as well, but you put your enzyme down, and what your enzyme layer is actually doing is converting glucose via glucose oxygen with a reaction of oxygen to give you glucolactone, which happens to hydrolyze to gluconic acid, and you generate hydrogen peroxide. And as long as you're applying a voltage of about 650 millivolts to the hydrogen peroxide, then you have a signal that is proportional to glucose. So current is proportional to glucose. Whoops, I just want to back up slightly. Now, it's going to be relevant to some of the questions this week, because one of the questions this week sort of shows a lack of linearity. And if your sensor is showing a lack of linearity, whether you're making a glucose sensor, a lactate sensor, a uric acid sensor, an oxygen sensor, a lactate sensor, if I haven't said that already. I'm listing out all the sensors that at least Zimmer & Peacock sells, or Zimmer & Peacock has formulations for, where the enzyme is oxidase. If you lack linearity with an oxidase-based sensor, then you probably need a barrier layer. And a barrier layer is essentially a film or a polymer that blocks partially the electrode. And so essentially it should be quite permeable to oxygen, so it shouldn't impinge the oxygen or impede the oxygen too much, but it should allow it should restrict or inhibit the glucose. So what the barrier layer does is it actually blocks the glucose slightly, but whilst allowing the oxygen to still travel. And that means then that you actually lose signal because you're blocking glucose. But actually what it means is you get greater linear range. So we started to talk about barrier layers last week, and now it's become relevant again this week. So I'm going to use this again. Now this is actual ZP Developer Zone members data. So this is kind of like a case study. So one of the ZP Developer Zones, they have our formulation for making glucose sensors. So you can either get glucose sensors from us by just buying them, or you can actually formulate your own glucose sensor. Now this is their cyclic voltammetry data. So let me just explain their cyclic voltammetry data a little bit. So they've taken a sort of platinum ZP electrode, and they've formulated onto it using the enzyme solution and the cross-linking solution that we have. But there's 4 sets of data among this cyclic voltammetry. And I should quickly mention, if you're not familiar with cyclic voltammetry, it's worth looking at what's called the ZP Academy, because we do have training courses on the ZP Academy. There's 2 free courses on the ZP Academy. One of those electrochemical techniques for biosensor developers, so it's definitely worth having a look at that. Anyway, these people have, this is 4 sets of data. 2 sets of data are gathered using a sensor made from ZP formulation. So that's the ZP formulations that they've been using. And then 2 sets of data are from, I want to say, sort of homebrew formulation. Now, I know I talk about 650 millivolts, but let's just look at 600 millivolts because it's simple to see. This difference is the difference between the cyclic voltammetry of just buffer and the cyclic voltammetry of buffer plus glucose. So there's a big difference when they add the glucose in. So that looks really encouraging. So what it actually says is our homebrew glucose sensor shows a really good strong signal between CV before glucose and CV after glucose. So that looks really promising. Now when you look at the ZP formulation, I have to zoom in because you can barely see the difference. So you'd actually say, well, that's really bad, isn't it? I mean, this is a glucose sensor, and by cyclic voltammetry, the ZP formulation only shows this tiny little signal difference in CV, but with my own homebrew formulation, I see lots of signal, so therefore it must be better. Now, obviously, I'm going to show you quite clearly. Actually, I think our formulation is much better, but we'll give you a scientific explanation as to why that is. The caveat is be very careful with cyclic voltammetry, because I say it at the end or in a few slides time, but cyclic voltammetry, the way you should test your sensor is in the way you intend to use it. So if you intend to make a chronoamperometric sensor, i.e. hold a voltage and measure the current with time, then you should be testing your sensor in the same way, and you shouldn't be relying on cyclic voltammetry. It's very dangerous, not dangerous, you could be careful with over-interpreting cyclic voltammetry. That's what I would like to say. So let's just go on a bit. Oops-a-daisy. And so the signal for the ZP formulation looked very small by cyclic voltammetry, but we'll explain why this is not a bad thing. So they've done cyclic voltammetry, and now they've done some chronoamperometry. And it's probably worth saying that ZP does have a lot of videos online on how to do these kind of experiments. We have something called the application zone, so you can actually watch videos about us doing this. But essentially what's going on here is this is their home brew formulation. It does show good signal as they change the glucose, and this is the ZP formulation. So as they change, you can see these little steps as they add the glucose. So again, you would say, well, by cyclic voltammetry, my home brew formulation was better than my ZP formulation. You know, so that's good and that's bad. But now let's look at the linearity on this. And so this is the home brew formulation, this is the ZP formulation. So, I mean, they only have one data set, and that's no criticism, but it's worth seeing that on their formulation, they have good linearity from 0 to 5 millimolar. Now, the range, I don't know these people's final application, but I have a feeling that they are interested in human health, because the range they're looking at is 0 to 25 millimolar. So look what happens. They have a good linearity from 0 to 5 millimolar, and they also, now with the ZP formulation, I would actually say you have a good linearity from 0 to 10 millimolar. Then they start losing linearity, but the ZP sensor starts losing its linearity, you know, much later on in that glucose concentration. And then they have very poor linearity, essentially from 10 to 25 millimolar, whereas ZP's linearity is plateauing off from 20 to 25 millimolar. So what I would say is this: sensitivity is important, but it's not, but so is linear, or being linear, and linear range. You can essentially have all the sensitivity in the world, but you will lose linear range quite early on. And the reason being is you can be either enzyme limited or oxygen limited. So you have to look back at the slides earlier on. But one of the essentially problems if you don't have a good linear range is because you've got either too much glucose arriving and therefore not enough enzyme activity, or in fact, you know, the real reaction that's going on here is glucose plus oxygen, and you become oxygen limited. So what do you have to do to fix this problem? You have to put in that barrier layer that I discussed earlier on. So you could potentially fix, and I say fix is this TUB formulation by actually putting in a barrier layer. I think in life is a compromise, and including science, and so you can't just have all the sensitivity in the world. If that was the case, then glucose sensors would be a lot easier. You actually have to balance sensitivity against linearity. And I would also say this, that you're trying to make a biosensor. A sensor by its nature should not have so much activity that it completely converts the sample into product. If you're working in a very small volume and you have a very active enzyme sensor, you can end up converting all of the glucose, for example, into gluconic acid. That's really a synthesis. When you're trying to sense, when you're trying to do an analysis, so you don't actually want your sensors to necessarily be so active that they end up converting all the sample. Because as I say, that's synthesis, not analysis. Now a few comments here. Cyclovoltammetry is interesting if you're a biosensor developer, but be very careful with it, because unless you're planning to actually use cyclovoltammetry as your analysis technique, then things like linearity are more important. I'd actually test the electrode in the way you expect to use it. So the amperometric method is the way to assess your sensor, not the cyclovoltammetry. Just saying hi to the guys who are online. If you've got any questions, by the way, you can put them in the comments as well, as we go along. So this is a warning. This is a video that we have on YouTube, and there's, essentially it's this: an over-reliance on cyclovoltammetry is risky for real-world biosensor developers. So you do see cyclovoltammetry a lot in the literature, and we use it an awful lot as well at ZP. But if you're, let's say, electrochemical glucose sensor is going to be using amperometry as its method of a mode of operation, don't over-rely on cyclovoltammetry, because cyclovoltammetry has what they call the Faradaic signal, which is what we want. So that's the glucose signal, but also a capacitance element that we don't want. And so when you scan voltage, you get capacitance. But if you do amperometry, you don't have capacitance because you're not scanning the voltage. So be careful about over-reliance on cyclovoltammetry, and I would sort of suggest you watch this video as well. Just last thing, these people were, not people, but these ZP developer members were worried that their sensor was different from our sensor. So when they make their sensor using the ZP formulation, at 25 millimolar, they have a signal of approximately 2 microamps. If you go to the ZP website and look at our raw data there, we also have a signal that's approximately 2 microamps. So these people, in their lab, they're using our formulation in their laboratory, but you can actually see that the signals are actually really comparable, that they are actually getting the same results as us. Considering that, they're probably hand pipetting, etc., they're doing a good job. So their signal's approximately 2 microamps to 25 millimolar, and our signal is approximately 2 microamps at 25 millimolar. So I'm just saying hi to guys who are joining online. So you can check out that data on our website as well. Another question that these people had. So as I say, the ZP, I'm trying to go quickly because it's 8:17. So this week we have talked an awful lot about glucose sensors. So these people have been, or these ZP developers or members have been using our enzyme solution and our cross-linkage solution and making their own glucose sensors on the ZP Platinum sensors. They've also been trying for what I would call a type 2 glucose sensor, where they're essentially, what they've done is they've taken a ZP Platinum sensor, they've put a catalytic surface on it, then they've put their enzyme solution on it, and then they've cross-linked it. So they've used that. Now their question is, whoops-a-daisy, their question is how do I get a greater linear range with this catalytic surface sensor? And so the quick answer is, it's the barrier layer again. That if you're making a sensor, especially an enzyme-based sensor, and you seem to be lacking linearity, you have to compromise, and actually you can get your linearity back by using a barrier layer. So you'll get your linearity, but you will also lose signal. But that is biosensing. You are balancing different, you want certain features, but you have to then compromise on other, let's say, features. So you have to kind of trade signal strength for linear range. So the quick answer to these guys is, if you want your type 2 glucose sensor to have greater linear range, then put a barrier layer in that, so you end up filtering a lot of the glucose, and you will lose signal, but you will get greater linear range. Just some additional information as well. So anyone who's interested in glucose sensing, we do sell these formulations and these glucose sensors on our website. It's probably worth saying that at this point we've been running one of our sensors now, glucose sensors, for 93 days. I'm not surprised. In vitro, glucose sensors are really robust. In vivo, when you try to put them into the body, or transdermally as you try to put them through the skin, all hell will break loose, because the body does not like, it's got foreign body object rejection. It does not like to have things stuck into it. It's good at defending us. But it's worth saying that our sensors and formulations have been running for 93 days. And we've also put some temperature characterization data up on our website as well. So Zimmer and Peacock, we're known for our standard products of screen printed electrodes and glucose formulations. But we're a very unusual company that provides these technologies, because actually day in, day out, we are doing this work for real in our labs. And so, that I am able to come to the developer zone and show you some new data, because day in, day out, our guys are doing testing. So this has been 93 days worth of testing. And then the this piece of data is actually, it shows the signal changing and then drops and then comes back up again. And in the graph below it, what we're doing is we're actually changing temperature. So the temperature's coming up, then we drop the temperature down, and in the green graph, the signal drops down, and that's actually the temperature effect. So a lot of the time, when we're using a glucose sensor, in a laboratory environment, the temperature is fairly well controlled, so you don't have an effect on your signal. But here we've deliberately gone out to understand how signal will change as a function of temperature. And I think we're approximately looking at something like between 5 and 25 degrees Celsius. It's actually quite a big effect. So if you are interested in glucose sensors and you're trying to predict maybe how the ZP glucose sensor will respond to temperature, or how our formulations will respond to temperature, then here's some free data on our website. You can take a look at that. Right, coming to the end now. I've got 9 minutes left, so we're going to go switch gears slightly to Djuli. There's been, now this webinar is always about what people ask in the forum. So we've been asked, will Djuli be able to do EIS soon? So I'll give you a sort of, I'd say it's in its alpha and beta stage at the moment, but on the web we have a learning center for Djuli, and we've put some EIS data up there. Now when this webinar is over, I will put a link, but essentially you can get some EIS data off the website and you can start uploading it to Djuli. I want to thank one of our engineers, Tue, who put together some slides for me. So what I'm going to do though is I'm going to change gears slightly. Let's just make sure that everything is... Yeah, so I'm going to change gears slightly. So what I've done is I've opened up Djuli. The first thing to say is I have... I've uploaded some data. So you, if you follow the link where I said I had some EIS data, if you download it, you can upload this data. And now what I've done is I've made sure that I've gone to the discrete study. This is a discrete study. And I made sure that I've chosen impedance discrete. And then I'm going to turn on the log x-axis, and then I will just close that down. And so what have I done here? I have uploaded EIS data, and now I am displaying EIS data. This is impedance versus frequency, and it's quite interesting to see, because immediately I can see that if I look at my axes here, I can see that I have different concentrations, and actually my signal is let's say 1 hertz or 10 hertz. Yeah, 1 hertz is best. I can see that I have a good signal versus concentration, and I can also see in the Nyquist plot that I have good signal versus concentration. There's a couple of things about Djuli that are really good. It's growing, so we are putting a lot of R&D into it. It's free, and every week, we were asked a few weeks ago whether it would start doing EIS, and so this week I'm able to start reporting that it is doing EIS. When I say it's free to members of the ZP Developer Zone. The next thing I'm going to do is actually do a impedance fit. So I'm just going to go back to my slides. Now this bit is a little bit at the moment. The impedance fit is done by sort of coding. So rather than being able to draw out the equivalent circuit, I've got this R1 resistor, which is the solution, is in parallel with an R2 resistor, a Warburg element, and a constant phase element rather. It's probably worth saying that if you're not so familiar with impedance spectroscopy, we do have a very long webinar on YouTube about impedance spectroscopy, and it's probably worth you watching that. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to paste in that, and I'm actually going to put in some sort of some values that 2A suggested. So 70, 36,000, 7,000. Let me just do that. 70, 36,000. Let me just check that one. 7,000. Now this is a work in progress, but you might get a sense that it's worth signing up for, because as this grows, you can kind of learn as we develop. You can learn alongside us, and it might well, I think it'll be A, interesting, and B, it's, you know, it's a nice cloud-based system. So now it's actually, what it's now done, this is I think the only piece of software in the world that will do this. I think what's wrong with impedance spectroscopy for biosensor developers, that impedance spectroscopy was kind of invented by people interested in corrosion and people interested in batteries. And in those applications, it's more rare that they're interested in signal versus concentration. But at ZP, we're really interested in signal versus concentration. So what it's done is it's given us all the elements, the Warburg, the constant phase element, the R2 value. Now the R2 value is also known as the charge transfer resistance. So what it's done is it's shown us that our charge transfer resistance, it's shown it as a function of concentration. So this, I think, is the only piece of software in the world where I've uploaded the EIS data and I can, you know, I can clearly see my signal versus frequency. But then I've coded in at the moment. It'd be nice when we can actually draw in the equivalent circuit, but I've coded in an equivalent circuit and it's extracted the R2 value as a function of concentration. So that's your signal versus concentration. So I see now, so if you're not using Djuli, please sign up. There is a training course on the ZP Academy for Djuli. Just contact me and you will get a free code, so that course can be completely free to you. And I probably have to start wrapping up from this point onwards. Now it's probably worth saying we cover a lot in these webinars, and deliberately so, because we can always return to it next week and next week and next week. You know, so you know, post your questions in the forum. You can see that we do go in the forum. I saw a question was posted on the forum about 4 minutes before we started, so I wasn't able to get to that one. But let me just do a quick summary for this week. So we are, you know, at ZP, we look at the forum. I think it was also worth saying, we look at the forum. Djuli, we were asked a couple of weeks ago whether Djuli will have EIS capability, and the answer is and it does. And I just had a nice response from one of our ZP Developer Zone members, and he's really taken the point, and I agree with him. You know, making a glucose sensor is a balance. I want lots of signal, but I also want linearity. So you have to you know, so it's almost like, yeah, you have to find the sweet spot, you know, where I've got enough signal, but I also have great linearity. So I'm glad you like that. That's cool. So I appreciate the comment. Thank you. And we are driven in this. We're driven in this webinar by the forum. So if you have any questions, post them in the forum. You know, you can see that we do product development based on the forum, and we also do you know, Q&As based on the forum as well. So I appreciate it, guys. It's 8:28. It's 8:29 now. I know we've only got 1 minute left, so I always try to keep it to 30 minutes because lots of you, like myself, have meetings and things to attend, but I appreciate your time for today. Just to say, we're starting to do a live streaming at 8 PM London time on Sundays as well. So if you're interested, we do a live streaming 8 PM London time on Sundays. It's really about news, but that will probably start moving more technical like this one as well, because we're getting so many technical questions. We're going to have to do 2 of these a week. All right, thanks very much. I appreciate all the new members. I appreciate the nice comments from our collaborators, and it's appreciated, guys. All right, take care. Bye-bye.